The alarm klaxons echoed through the sterile corridors of Research Station Kepler-7 as Dr. Maya Chen crouched beside the massive reinforced containment cell, her fingers pressed against the transparent aluminum barrier. Inside, 2 Vorthak cubs, each the size of a small bear despite being barely 6 months old, pressed their scaled snouts against the same spot, their amber eyes fixed on her face. "Step away from the containment unit, Dr. Chen," Commander Reeves ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Behind him, a squad of heavily armed security personnel shifted nervously, their pulse rifles humming with charged energy. "Those things are dangerous." Maya didn't move. She couldn't. Not when Crix and Nala were looking at her with such desperate confusion in their reptilian features. The cubs had been making that low, mournful sound for 3 days now, ever since the Galactic Council's decree had arrived, ordering their immediate transfer to a military research facility. "They're not things, Commander," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of months spent studying these remarkable creatures. "They're children." The larger cub, Crix, suddenly reared up on his hind legs, placing massive claws against the barrier. Even at his young age, he stood nearly 7 feet tall. His sister Nala mimicked the gesture, and together they began that haunting vocalization again, a sound somewhere between a whale's song and a wolf's howl. "Dr. Chen, I have my orders," Reeves insisted, gesturing to his team. "The Council has classified the Vorthak as Class A predators. These specimens need to be relocated to Facility Black 7 for weapons development research." Maya's blood ran cold. She knew what Facility Black 7 was, a military installation where alien species were dissected, studied, and ultimately weaponized. The cubs would become nothing more than test subjects, their incredible intelligence and emotional capacity ignored in favor of understanding how to kill their adult counterparts. "They imprinted on me," Maya said, finally turning to face the commander. Her dark eyes blazed with defiance. "When their pod crashed on Kepler-7's moon, I was the first being they saw. In Vorthak culture, that creates a bond stronger than genetic family ties." "Irrelevant," Reeves snapped. "Stand down, Doctor." But as the security team moved forward with heavy-duty containment collars and neural suppressors, something extraordinary happened. Crix let out a thunderous roar that shook the entire laboratory, and both cubs began to change. Their scales shifted from deep green to a brilliant crimson, a color Maya had only read about in xenobiology texts. War pattern coloration. Even as juveniles, the Vorthak were entering combat mode. "Commander, you need to stop," Maya warned, pressing herself against the containment cell as if her small frame could somehow protect the cubs inside. "You don't understand what you're triggering." The first security officer reached for the cell's control panel, and that's when the impossible happened. Nala, the smaller of the 2 cubs, pressed both claws against a specific point on the barrier and pushed. The transparent aluminum, rated to withstand a direct missile strike, began to crack. "That's impossible," Reeves breathed, raising his weapon. "The calculations showed they wouldn't develop that kind of strength for another 5 years. Maya smiled grimly. "You forgot the most important variable in your calculations, Commander. Humans." The barrier shattered with a sound like thunder, and both cubs burst free in an explosion of crystalline fragments. But instead of attacking the security team, as every xenobiology textbook said they should, they immediately flanked Maya, positioning themselves between her and the armed humans. Their massive heads turned toward her, seeking direction. "Stand down," Reeves shouted, his weapon trained on Crix's broad skull. "We will fire." "No, you won't," Maya said calmly, placing one hand on each cub's snout. At her touch, their crimson scales immediately began shifting back to their normal green. "Because you've just witnessed something that will change everything we know about interspecies relations." She looked directly at the commander, her voice gaining strength. "These cubs didn't just break free. They could have done that any time in the past 3 months. They waited until someone threatened the bond they share with me. The Vorthak aren't just predators, Commander. They're a species capable of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. They're fighting not for territory or food, but for family." Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's chief xenobiologist, stepped forward from where he'd been observing in stunned silence. Maya's right. The energy readings I'm getting from the cubs are off the charts, but it's not aggression we're detecting. It's protective instinct. They're trying to shield her. Crix and Nala had grown quiet, but they remained alert, their massive forms creating a living barrier around Maya. Every few seconds, one of them would nudge her gently with their snout, as if reassuring themselves that she was unharmed. The Galactic Council needs to see this data, Dr. Webb continued, his fingers flying over his portable scanner. If the Vorthak are capable of this level of emotional bonding with humans, it changes everything about the war. Commander Reeves slowly lowered his weapon, the implications beginning to dawn on him. For 6 months, the galaxy had been preparing for an inevitable conflict with the Vorthak Empire, convinced that the species were nothing more than savage predators bent on expansion and conquest. But if they were capable of forming familial bonds with other species. Dr. Chen, Reeves said carefully, what exactly are you proposing? Maya looked down at Crix and Nala, who had settled into sitting positions but remained vigilantly protective. I'm proposing that instead of preparing for war, we prepare for the most important diplomatic mission in galactic history. These cubs aren't weapons to be studied, they're ambassadors, and they're going to help us prove that humans and Vorthak aren't natural enemies. She knelt down between the two cubs, who immediately pressed close to her sides, their rumbling purrs vibrating through the damaged laboratory. They chose to protect rather than attack. They chose love over violence. That's not just Vorthak nature, Commander. That's what happens when you raise predator cubs with human values. As if in response to her words, both cubs lifted their massive heads toward the ceiling and let out a synchronized call, no longer mournful but triumphant. It was a sound that spoke of loyalty, of bonds that couldn't be broken by barriers or weapons or fear. In that moment, as alarms continued, Tawale and security teams stood stunned. Maya realized she wasn't just witnessing the birth of an interspecies family. She was watching the first steps toward galactic peace, built on the simple truth that love, human love, could transform even the most fearsome predators into protectors. The cubs had torn through every barrier designed to separate them from their chosen human. Now it was time to tear through the barriers between their species and build something better in their place.